Welcome back to your favorite weekly horoscope, this time for October 10th through October 16th of 2022. This week, we have some pretty awesome highlights to go over. Mercury goes back into Libra. We get to go back over that space where Mercury was retrograding over the past few weeks. The last time Mercury entered Libra was really, I think, at the end of August. So there's stuff from the end of August and the beginning of September we're going to be coming back to this week. We also have the Sun making a trine to Saturn. That's not the biggest aspect ever, but I think it's actually going to be pretty good for both the Sun and Saturn. We'll talk about that. Mars square Neptune is probably the worst aspect that we have this week. And it's not going to be the last time that we deal with this. This is going to be something that continues out for the next couple of months, really until like about March of 2023. And like I've said before, March of 2023, the whole world is changing. And I mean that in a very literal way. We'll talk about that. Mercury goes opposite Jupiter. This whole Mercury retrograde we just got done with has been going opposite Jupiter. So we get our third and final pass of this, transit that we've been dealing with. So there gets to be some honesty in our conversations again. We have Venus trining Saturn this week. Awesome. I think this is like the most supportive transit that we have this week. And Mercury finally leaves shadow by the end of the week. This is really exciting. Of course, I'm sure everyone here is really looking forward to this Mercury retrograde phase completely ending and actually being actually moving on. But a lot to go over this week. Something I wanted to mention with this week and next week. These are the last 2 good weeks of the year. That's not to say the whole rest of the year is a shit show. But if you've been a client of mine, I have told you the first 3 weeks of October are really good. The last week of October and the first week of November are not. And I mean that. Like, it's really bad. So really enjoy this time while you can. This is the time to have fun. This is the time to enjoy stuff. So we start this week off with just the moon being void in Aries. We get off that full moon in Aries, right? We're all recharged. We're, hyped up. As the moon starts to wane and starts to decrease in light, the moon will be void. So if you don't know what a void moon is, it's pretty much not making an aspect to anything until it enters a new sign. But then it enters Taurus. And this is where I think the energy gets at least a little bit more chill. Now, what you define as chill is a little bit, subjective. But what I wanted to bring up here is the moon in Taurus is a time to saturate yourself, right? We just got off this full moon in Aries, supercharged with a lot of energy, a lot of action, a lot of initiation. But as the moon goes into Taurus, this is where we kind of get to settle in that energy, right? Kind of think about it as, let's say you somehow gain a victory, whether that's through a sport or something like that, somewhere where you gain some victory. And then after the adrenaline kind of calms down, you can kind of sit in that victory mindset. You can kind of sit in that reward. As the moon goes into Taurus, I think this is an excellent time to really kind of get your center together, get your shit together in a sense. Not necessarily when I say get your shit together, sometimes I'm like, you need to get your life together. This is much more of all right, just got off the full moon. I'm feeling supercharged. Now, how do I take that energy and make it consistent? How do I apply that energy? When I say apply energy too, I like to think of things as being fueled up. And that full moon in Aries was like a big fuel up. Now that you have this fuel, where are you putting it into? Are you putting it into other areas in your life, or are you just focusing on one area? I think as the moon goes into Taurus, it's an excellent time to just kind of get saturated in that feeling. It is a waning moon, so this isn't like an excitement, I need to get my shit together. It's kind of like all right, we handled this, now it's time for X, Y, and Z. It's like if you win a basketball game, you're heralded victor, you're excited, and then you do your press conference, then you do your interview, then you go to the locker room to kind of celebrate and calm down. That's what's going on here. This is post-victory chill time. So Monday's not really a big deal. Seems actually pretty relaxing in my opinion. But as we go to Tuesday, as you noticed, there's no glyphs here, and that's because there's so much action on Tuesday. Number 1, Mercury goes back into Libra. It's still in shadow, so this is all stuff that we've been dealing with. This isn't anything new, but Mercury goes back into Libra. The Sun will square Saturn. Oh, did I put square? I mean to put trine. Imagine a triangle. Sun trines Saturn on Tuesday, but Mars squares Neptune on Tuesday, and the moon will conjoin the North Node and Uranus and square Saturn. So this is a lot to kind of dissect. So let's go ahead and just pull up the chart. This might make it a little bit easier. The first thing I want to talk about is probably just the Sun trining Saturn real quick. Because the sun is in fall in Libra, and what that means is like there's domicile, which is like what planet rules a certain sign. The sun rules Leo. Leo's all about, like confidence, your sense of self. The sun likes to be, really bright in Leo. It's summertime, right? In fall, as you can guess, fall starts, but the sun, light starts to dissipate. It's even day, even night, but the night starts to grow longer. So the sun's energy is literally waning. So the sun isn't that necessarily strong in Libra, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything bad. But the sun in Libra is much more focused on relationships, much more focused on connections. It needs other people to find that power. It needs other people to find that will. And as the sun trines Saturn, I see this as an opportunity, again, for connection. I think with all of these Libra transits that we're having, the term connection is really important. The sun will trine Saturn where there is this kind of... I've talked a lot about Saturn in Aquarius being, everyone is so divided on everything. Our ideas are fixed. You're either on this side, you're on that side. There's this sense of connecting with other people based on ideas and things like that. And this is a two-way street. On one side of this is connecting more with people that are on your side. This is finding more of that empowerment through people that you see eye to eye with. However, the other part of this, though, is as the sun's in Libra and Saturn is in Aquarius, right, in its home sign, this might be like you leaning more into the group thought than maybe your own individual will. And you have to have discernment, right? I guess it's frustrating in the spiritual astrology community how many, and I'm not saying you specifically, but how many of you lack discernment. All of this stuff should be taken with a grain of salt. You should take what works for you and apply that. And if it doesn't work for you, leave it alone. However, as that sun trines Saturn, this might be feeling like you're leaning in a little bit more or feeling at the mercy of this group dynamic, of this group thought. Now, the sun's in Libra, right? And it is in the superior position, which means it's at like the sun is like this is a good example. Saturn is here in the first house. The sun is on top. So there's this sense of the sun is in control here. The sun is the leader of this situation. So there is kind of this, feeling of trying to work things out with people. However, that might become a little bit hard to do when you need other people to rely on. Let's say you're not going to agree on everything with everybody. And this might be one of those days where you might have to work with someone, you might have to connect with someone where you may not necessarily agree, but you have to have that camaraderie, you have to have that teamwork in order to get the dream to work. I think that saying is so funny, but I think it's super true. So as the sun trines Saturn, there's this kind of not confident feeling in having to work with other people and having to kind of stick with the group in a sense. The other thing, though, is that Mercury enters Libra. And again, Mercury's still in shadow. So what that means is Mercury is still in that spot in the sky where it's been going back and forth for the past couple weeks, really since the end of October. The end of August. And as Mercury goes back into Libra, Mercury, our mindset, what we're thinking, how we're communicating, while it was in Virgo, it was much more specified. It was much more, articulate. It did station direct opposite Neptune, so there was some confusion on how to clarify things. But as Mercury goes into Libra, this is opening up the door again to communicating in relationships. There's so much relationship energy going on here. And that doesn't necessarily just mean, lovers and things like that, but just people in general and ideas and relating and connecting. As Mercury goes into Libra, there's more of this mindset focus on relationships, on building bridges, on connecting. And as Mercury goes back into Libra, it will be going opposite Jupiter, as you see here. I believe that was something that was going on Wednesday. Yeah. So it technically actually happens on Wednesday. Just the image I had to get here shows it kind of doing it now. But as Mercury goes back into Libra, wanting to communicate something to someone, and Mercury's been retrograde opposite Jupiter, it's been facing these really big truths. And that's been a little bit difficult. We've had to, see Mercury going direct, Mercury being in shadow, being direct opposite Jupiter was big expansion of truth. Mercury retrograde, we were re-examining that truth, re-examining that conversation. As Mercury goes back over Jupiter, it's time to have this conversation for real. When Mercury stationed direct, it was having the solution figured out, but this is actually serving the paperwork. This is actually having that talk. This is actually saying what needs to be said here. And it is a little bit intense. It's opposite Jupiter, but I think as Mercury goes into Libra, because we'll talk about opposite Jupiter tomorrow, but as Mercury goes Sorry, there's a cat disturbing my green screen. As Mercury goes into Libra, there is this more mental focus on just the connection, on just relating to other people. The other thing that we've got going on is Mars squares Neptune. So I've been wanting to keep my weekly horoscope, which is also going to be going under a new name here soon, more personal development focused. But and I wanted to keep more of my like political opinions more on the delineation. However, I think this is really important because this Mars square Neptune is going to be, I think, overwhelming and confusing in a lot of ways. I think there has been a lot of information and data that has been more and more out and about, and that's going to go against a lot of what we have been deceived to believe. With Mars squaring Neptune, Mars is your action, Mars is your energy, Mars is your drive. More importantly, Mars is how you fight conflicts. And in Gemini, it's all about debates. I just did a podcast with S.J. Anderson talking all about this. Make sure you guys watch it. But this is where the debate gets confusing, and I think this is where things aren't adding up. I think you're going to see that in a collective way. I don't necessarily always subscribe to like the collective consciousness idea. The way I look at collective consciousness is the same way I look at a radio frequencies. There's like 540 AM all the way to I think like 104 something FM. Within that range, we can all be tuned into certain frequencies. But this is one of those times where, back in I believe it was the 80s, there was this Russian, I'm totally going to botch this. Let me know in the comments if you know what I'm talking about. But there was this Russian radio thing that was like going out in the airwaves, and it was literally cutting into people's television, into people's radios with this like little glitch. If one of my older followers, you guys probably know what I'm talking about. Let me know if you know what I'm talking about in the comments though, because there was like this little like glitch that was hitting like the radio and all television. It hit everywhere, and that's kind of this Mars square Neptune, because Mars is going to be squaring Neptune. I think this is the first one in October. We get another one, I believe, somewhere in December, and then we get another one in March. And over this time, there's going to be this reworking of the data, this reworking of our, especially how do we argue with data? What facts are we arguing with? And as that squares Neptune, that data that you might have, that, science-backed research might actually prove not real. And I want you to think about this on a personal level, right? Because something I think that is really fun about doing horoscopic astrology and just talking about the world is we can see world events, right? And see how the astrology reflects it, but then also reflect on how that might resonate in our own personal lives. And as Mars is in Gemini and we're changing the way that we're doing things, we are going about our actions in a different way. Mars is slowing down, so maybe we're realizing that we need more information. As Mars squares Neptune, this is maybe a point where you kind of go, oh, that's not what I thought. Oh, this isn't actually how I saw it. Oftentimes, when I'm scrolling through whatever, I'll read something like a headline or a title, and then I'll try to remember it later, but might, forget something here or there that makes it a little bit more confusing. That's what's really going on with this, is realizing that you don't have the full picture here. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That could be a bad thing if you're just expecting to know everything and going full front. This just seems like a lot of like, whoa, hold up for a second. What am I doing here? Where is this going? And what am I being told? I think Mars square Neptune can also be very overwhelming. I talked, the people, I'm trying not to get offensive here. I kind of get frustrated when people use the term like neurotypical, because it's so too many people use the term not neurotypical when most of you pretty much are. You just eat too much junk food and watch too much TV. But for the people that get very overwhelmed by stimulus, this is one of those days where you're going to feel overwhelmed. Whether it's through information, through data, on the news, you might feel really overwhelmed. So one of the ways I would really look at this is taking things one step at a time and not being afraid to be adaptable. If you are fixed and rigid, I think this might be a little bit more hardcore, but slowing down on the information, right? How much are you consuming? How much are you taking in? And because Mars is now slowing down in Gemini, this is going to be a reworking of the data, a reworking of the paperwork, a reworking of, the information that we have to work with. So as Mars squares Neptune, you might get a little bit confused and overwhelmed. Now, the other thing to talk about, we haven't even talked about the moon yet on Tuesday. On Tuesday, the moon will conjoin the North Node, and then I believe it will conjoin Uranus first and then square Saturn. Expect disruption. Expect chaotic events. That moon conjoining Uranus. And look, I mean, it's like within the same hour. Within the same hour, the moon conjoins Uranus and then squares Saturn. So it's like all of a sudden, again, the moon's in Taurus. We're wanting to focus on, what is valuable, what is nourishing. It conjoins Uranus where we might be doing something innovative. We might be doing something sporadically. But then the moon will square Saturn where that might go against the fixation of things. Now, something I've been actually really reflecting on is Saturn and Aquarius being our ideas being fixed. And while I love to sit here and say, we should all be open-minded and things like that, which, I mean, I think that's true. I think it's really hard to see where we're fixed in our own mindset and beliefs about ourselves, right? That's the subconscious. Like, some people love to be like, I totally know all about my subconscious. No, you don't. That's the whole point of it. Like you can be aware of it at times and work on it, but it's the subconscious. Like, there's certain people out there that have such a fixated belief about something about themselves or reality that is so unchangeable that they will create this whole reality to confirm that belief. And I look at this moon conjoining Uranus squaring Saturn as something that you might do that's that's innovative, that is sporadic, is going to challenge the fixated way that you look at things. And that's not necessarily easy, right? I mean, look at how much is going on here, right? Mercury goes into Libra. We have a change of information, right? Mercury's all about information. Mars is in Mercury's sign and it's squaring Neptune. This information isn't adding up. And then the moon conjoins Uranus and squares Saturn. That might kind of be a hard pill to swallow, so in a sense. So Tuesday looks quite chaotic, and this is stuff that we're going to be talking about as time goes on, because this is not anything that's just ending here. We're going to be talking Mars square Neptune for the next few months. But I think on Tuesday, a lot of extreme changes happen. When I say extreme changes, I really think it's about the mindset part of it. And I can just riff on this for a really long time, but I want to continue on here. But just to wrap this up, I think Mars square Neptune, really make sure you're understanding the full picture here. And if you find something that challenges the way your preconceived notions about things, which I think you will, I think this would be a time to not let that overwhelm you. I think especially with Mars and Gemini, like you don't need to debate, you don't need to argue. Why don't you sit in that? Like, before you just, there's reactions and there's responses. When you react, you're kind of giving your power away in a lot of ways, but responding to something kind of sometimes takes reflection and deeper thought. And I think this is on Tuesday a better time to respond and not just react to things. So as we get into Wednesday, Mercury goes opposite Jupiter. The moon will sextile Neptune, trine Pluto. The moon's not doing too much on Wednesday. I think that's fine. But the Mercury-Jupiter opposition is really having that conversation. And this happens much more earlier in the morning, maybe even later night onto Tuesday. But we have to have these conversations. We have to say what we have to say. And I believe that Mercury opposite Jupiter is really like, what's that Oprah Winfrey meme? What is the truth? And I think as Mercury's in Libra, it's also a morning star at this point. I'm pretty sure Mercury's still visible at this point. But as Mercury's in Libra, the way that we communicate is much more focused on balance, much more focused on fairness, on justice, on connection, on even things like love. And I think opposite Jupiter in Aries is, like tough love almost in a sense. Now, you don't have to be a dick, but, this is stuff that I've been really reflecting on. It's much more fucked up to not tell someone what the truth is, even if you think it's going to hurt their feelings or pop their bubble. Because you have to kind of understand where you're coming from. Is it much more friendly to lie to people and say, oh yeah, you should do that, that's fine, live your life? Or should you be that guy that says, no, I don't agree with this, or no, I don't think that's fair, or no, I don't think you're doing that the right way? And some of you might need to shut up. Some of you might need to speak out. Everyone's kind of different here, but I think what the astrology is really symbolizing here is there has to be some honest truth going on here, and the way you break it should be much more diplomatic and fair. But at the end of the day, it's opposite Jupiter and Aries. This is going to, like, Jupiter and Aries is like very, again, your beliefs, your confidence, your faith is really stored into your capabilities, your ability to fight, your ability to, lead. And this is kind of a breaking the news and being honest in a fair and balanced way. However, it might go against your ideals, right? Mercury is about rationality, Jupiter is about ideals, and those two go into conflict quite a bit. Mercury rules Gemini. Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. They're opposite in general. Same thing with Virgo and Pisces. Mercury and Jupiter are opposite energies. So there is this kind of bringing the rational to the ideal and asking where is a fair balance in between these things. The moon will sextile Neptune and trine Pluto. Again, not the biggest deal ever. However, I think this might help when it comes to doing what needs to be done. I think as the moon sextiles Neptune, there is a kind of confusing aspect to it, but as it trines Pluto, there's a very empowering aspect to what these truths reveal. It's also the moon here at the later degrees of Taurus. We're not really changing. We're kind of fixated in our ways at this kind of moment emotionally, and we maybe need to take a little bit more power in that. As we go to Thursday, the moon will then enter Gemini, and it will sextile Jupiter, it will trine Mercury, and we have Venus trining Saturn. So I like this. Now, like I've said before, as the moon ingresses into these air and fire signs, it's really going to be activating all of these planets, which is true here. And as the moon enters Gemini, our emotions get much more focused on communication, ideas, and the moon in Gemini is like a day to just like, if you don't talk to yourself, like I talk to myself literally out loud all the time, and I used to think people were crazy for doing that versus I think you're crazy if you don't talk to yourself out loud. But I have Gemini placement, so maybe we see things differently. And as the moon goes into Gemini, this is more of a time of, expressing your emotions, talking about things, and also just changing your emotions, like, getting in new information and maybe changing the way that you feel, right? This is a mutable sign. The moon will be trining Mercury. It'll be sextiling Jupiter. There's a lot of confidence here. I think as the moon goes into Gemini and trines Mercury, it's like that information is received very well, and that might help you in changing your ideas or changing your emotions about something. And I think the most important thing is Venus trines Saturn here. This is helping us relate and connect to the people that we want to connect to. Saturn in Aquarius, it's kind of like, I can't think of the best example, but maybe like, this isn't really a good example. Actually, I would love your comments below because some of you probably know more about this than I do. But think of like Soviet Russia and the Iron Curtain, and where were things where Saturn was in Aquarius too, or during at least when the Berlin Wall came up, and then a few years after that, Saturn was in Aquarius. And there's this sort of authoritarian divide on ideas, right? But Venus in Libra, it's like you still got Western stuff in Russia, right? Like, wasn't Pepsi a big thing? I don't know the specifics of that. Or better yet, another example was like the Civil War. I said this example before, I forgot when, but like when the North and the South were fighting, they were still trading coffee and cigarettes with each other behind, tucked away in a different corner. And this is one of those things where there is still this ability to connect. We're all human beings. We want to connect with people, and we might find something valuable like coffee and cigarettes to connect with other people. And sure, it's the sun in Libra. Maybe we shouldn't be connecting on this level, but that connection's there. So I think as Venus goes into Libra and trines Saturn, this is really focusing on the peace, the justice, the connection aspect of this. And it's trining Saturn. I think this is helping alleviate that really harsh Saturn and Aquarius feeling of like either it's black and white, it's this side or that side. This is a cardinal sign. Libra is a cardinal sign, so initiating, beginning things, beginning the sense of how can we work things out? How can we bring things together? I think is a really big part of Thursday. Was that it on Thursday? Was there anything else? Yeah, that's pretty much it. Venus trine Saturn, though, I think it's going to feel good with connecting with people, especially people within your community, building communities, connecting with other people. All great stuff for Thursday. As we get into Friday, though, whoops, I accidentally clicked Saturday. As we get into Friday, though, the moon will then trine Saturn and Venus and conjoin Mars and square Neptune. So, this is funny. Like, have you ever been in a situation where you really like someone? Like, maybe you're going to a party and everything's really cool, but then you ask them, then someone brings up some random political opinion. We're like, oh, God, no, that's not what I want to talk about right now. That's a lot of this. Like, the moon is trining Saturn, it's trining Venus, everything's going along really well, but then the moon conjoins Mars and squares Neptune pretty much at the exact same time, where you go, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that, or, oh, maybe that was too much to expose. The moon conjoining Mars is also like feeling frustrated. It's kind of like, have you ever had someone that you can connect to as a friend, and maybe you feel more compelled to debate them or argue with them because they're your friend? That's kind of like this day. But I think as the moon squaring Neptune and conjoining Mars, like, something I've really realized over these past few years with everything is people feel safer in conditions that allow them to not think. And this isn't necessarily like a jab at anyone, but this is one of those situations where, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink it. And I think as the moon's conjoining Mars here, it's going to feel very frustrating. Like, you can't get someone to see the right idea. You can't see, you're making all these connections. It's there. It's great. But there's just something on top of it where you're not seeing eye to eye to them. And it's Mars square Neptune. This might not even be something that you expect. Like, everything should be going good, and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, they just said what? And as the moon, it's literally like the moon squares Neptune and conjoins Mars is like, again, either saying something that gets misinterpreted, or you hearing something that you're like, wait, did they just say that? Is that actually what they believe? And then the moon conjoins Mars, where there is this kind of debating, arguing aspect to it. A lot of debates and arguing over these next few months, guys. Lots of it. It's not going to stop for a long time. We got a lot of things going on in the world. But this moon-Mars conjunction, I think it's really irritating, especially because it's like the perfect situation. Like, all this air stuff, all these air trines, everything is like, where it's like having a debate with people, having both sides, but, and this is true for both sides too. Like, I get really frustrated when people just call me like a conservative because of some of my beliefs or whatever. It's like when you play the binary game, like, if I get frustrated when people are like, you can be non-binary gender, but you are either a Democrat or Republican. God, the lack of nuance people fucking have with anything these days is insane. But this is one of those things where when you play into that, like, you're going to find people that get stuck in those binaries, and it's not going to be, it's immovable in a lot of ways. So I think this just feels very frustrating. I think you'll be able to get your words out here. I don't know if they'll fall upon deaf ears, but you're definitely not changing anything at that moment. You might plant a seed, but you're not changing anything on this moment, although the conversations are being had. And so we get to Saturday, and the moon goes into Cancer, and it will square Jupiter. What I like about the moon going into Cancer, this is now a waning moon. This is like, all right, like that moon, Mars, Gemini might be very, like, again, the very overstimulated people, a lot of my Gen Z people out there, or people that have ADHD, you're going to feel very stimulated and very anxious on Friday. And as we go into Saturday, it's like, is all of that energy worth it? As the moon goes into Cancer, what do you need? It's going to square Jupiter and Aries. You want to fight, you want to believe, you want to do all this stuff, but you have to take care of your needs. Something I've talked about quite a bit, because I'm a big history nerd. I love studying history, and it's a very integral part to astrology. If you practice astrology and you don't know anything about history, your astrology knowledge shrinks very, very low if you don't know some history. But as that moon in Cancer squares Jupiter and Aries, there's this sense of like, and this is why I bring this up, the history thing. When it comes to like war, like one of my favorite parts about war is the logistics of food. Like, feeding soldiers is such a weird logistic thing to do, but it's had to be done in all military movements. Back in like the Roman days, they would just pillage whatever, place they were at and steal all their food and stuff like that. It doesn't really work like that anymore. But as the moon squares Jupiter, there's the sense of like, hey, before you just go rah and pushing this thing, you need to ask yourself, what are your needs? And the moon's in Cancer. It will be squaring Mercury too. The moon will, square Jupiter and then square Mercury, where the moon in Cancer squaring Jupiter is kind of like, hey, I can't do this until I'm fed. I can't do this until I get my 6 to 8 hours of sleep. And after there's this sort of negotiation of what your needs are, the moon will then square Mercury in Libra, where it might feel unbalanced. It might feel not like fair. Like, well, let's say, Mercury in Libra opposite Jupiter in Aries, you tell a friend, I'll totally help you out with whatever you need. This might be a day where you're like, hey, actually, I need to take some time for myself. I need to, take care of things, make sure like I'm rested, I'm nourished, I'm not anxious about stuff. And the moon in Cancer will square Mercury in Libra. For example, some people are whiny babies, and you can't just, it's one of those things where it's all about compromise, especially with the Libra stuff too. It's all about compromise. And this might be one of those days where, okay, if someone's being a whiny baby, you don't have to just be like, all right, you're just a whiny baby, shut the fuck up. Well, for example, animals, with dogs, for example. And I would love to hear your opinions about this too, but like when it comes to like working with animals, you have to give them positive reinforcement. Like we have a dog here who's kind of skittish. He was born under the meat grinder in 2019, if you know what I'm talking about. Really anxious dog, and like if you like bark orders at him, he's like gets all nervous. Versus if you want him to like go inside, you have to be like, hey, come on, let's go in. And I look at this moon in Cancer squaring Mercury and Libra as like, you can't just be like, dog, get inside, because then he goes like, like that's very scary. So you have to be like, come on, you have to have positive reinforcement to get people to go along. And I think that's what this moon in Cancer transit is like, you have to appeal to that side of people of like, hey, like rather than just Mars, the moon and Mars and Gemini just arguing and yelling, like moon and Cancer is like, look, this is how I actually really feel. How can I actually bestow some honesty? How can I really show some empathy and really speak with my heart out, really speak with my chest open, speaking vulnerably? And so I think there is this sense of, hey, let's just have this conversation, and it's squaring Jupiter and it's squaring Mercury. You're not going to feel good saying it, and it's not going to be easy to say it, and maybe not even received that well, but all you can really do is be honest. All you can really do is just say how it is, right? You're just a human being. So I think a lot of Saturday is just kind of calming your nerves down, really focusing on, what needs to be said, being honest with how you feel, and appealing to that side of people that is much more like giving and caring, right? Rather than just fighting and aggressing it. There's the opposition view, and then there's like the open. Like if you're in if you've ever done any like plays or stage work or anything like that, like you want to be open to your audience. You don't want to be like back here, right? Like if I did my horoscope like this would be stupid. I want to be open, right? And this is also kind of like if I was standing like this, it's very confrontational versus I stand in a much more open and receiving manner. That's all. And I do that on purpose, by the way. So then we get to Sunday. Oh, that's Saturday. We get into Sunday. The moon will make a square to Mercury. Again, that's something that will happen later on Saturday going into the morning of Sunday. And Mercury leaves shadow. I wish I had a glyph for Mercury leaving shadow. I don't have a glyph yet. Now, the thing is the moon squares Mercury first thing in the morning. This is, again, where the moon will square Jupiter first on Saturday, where there is this kind of sense like, hey, I need to take care of this. Then the moon squares Mercury where, maybe you have some other obligations to take care of before you can help other people, right? Put your mask on before this is airplane stuff, not COVID stuff, but like you have to put your mask on first before you can help others with their masks. That's like big life advice, by the way. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot help other people unless you are taken care of. Because if you're just on 0% and you're trying to help people, you're actually not helping anybody. And you could potentially be making the situation worse because people aren't actually receiving the help that they need. Neither are you. So anyway, that moon will go into, the moon will still be in Cancer, and then it's pretty much not doing much for the rest of the day. But Mercury finally leaves shadow. Mercury has been in shadow since late August. It stationed retrograde at the beginning of September. Then it went retrograde all through September. Then it stationed direct at the beginning of October. And now we're in the middle of October, and we're finally moving on from all of this stuff, right? Where, Mercury in retrograde in Libra, we've been re-examining our relationships, going over relationships again, thinking about other people, and especially our role with it, right? Jupiter is in Aries. Like, where is our role? What are our beliefs? What are our ideals about us? And how do we bring that into consciousness with our relationships, with other people? And I think as Mercury leaves shadow, this is a point where we kind of know where we stand with people. I think we've said what needs to be said, and we can finally move on to other things. That being, Mercury is still going to be in Libra. There still is this rational part of our minds that is more focused on, beauty, love, romance, connections, friendships. But now that it's leaving shadow, there's this sense of moving on from something that we've been re-examining and thinking about for the past couple of weeks. We're finally on to something else. So, with that being said, I'm not done. We have to talk about next week. And let me be really clear. We have set amount of days, pretty much until next Sunday. So the 23rd. I want you to circle the 23rd on your calendar and like just black on the rest of the days till November 8th. Shit's going to get really crazy. I mean, really crazy. Not just like, an astrologer saying the world's going to get crazy. It's going to get really crazy. Next week is really awesome before the sun and Venus enter Scorpio. The sun will trine Mars, Venus will trine Mars. We have this Venus Cazimi, and then it's literally day and night. The sun and Venus will enter Scorpio. Still Cazimi pretty much. And Saturn stations direct. I don't want to say I get nervous, but when we talk about not just next week, but the week after that, shit's really heavy. And it's probably going to be a pretty deep horoscope. But I think next week, I mean, it's just kind of still living in this fun energy that we have. I think this week, last week, this week, and next week, really, really enjoy. And it's not till next Sunday when you watch this horoscope again where shit really gets crazy. So my final thoughts, I think a lot about Mars square Neptune and how lost and confused we might feel at this time. I think there's going to be a lot of information that really stokes a lot of fear. I mean, as you've been seeing, we're closer to a world war than we've ever been, a nuclear war than we've ever been. I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up becoming true. The next 6 months, as far as world astrology goes, is we are in a shift. The world is changing here. And I think with Mars square Neptune over this past week, I think it's going to be really important to keep an open mind and to know that whatever information that you receive or kind of conflicts your worldview, we're going to be dealing with for the next little while. So this week, just do your thing, live in the moment like you should be. Everything's going to happen the way that it's going to happen. But just know that this isn't over yet and that you have a couple of chances to do things over again. Personally for me right now, I'm working on so many things that, frustrate me and that challenge my beliefs about myself. And I'm using this Mars retrograde time as a period to, again, go against the grain of what I believe, or at least what my ego wants to believe. And I think with Mars squaring Neptune, I mean, that's going to show up in a couple other ways in my life. But I look at Mars and Gemini squaring Neptune and Pisces as there needs to be some kind of a realization here. And when you realize it, it's not just like, oh, realization, okay, moving on. The way that you change your behavior will change based off of this revelation. Your actions, your movements, and what kind of information you're going for is going to change after this Mars square Neptune. So I think when this happens, just know this isn't the end. Meaning, it's not just, oh, here's this information, deal with it. We're going to be coming back to this for a few times, and this won't get wrapped up until March of 2023. Think about that. We have the rest of October, November, December, January, February, and March. Got a lot of stuff to go on here. So that's my final thoughts. That's what I got for you guys this week. I really love and appreciate every single one of you. Feel free to book a consultation with me before the year gets started or before the next year. That's when I get really busy and booked out. So I have a lot more availability right now. I'd love to do a consult with you guys. I'm getting great reviews. I now have reviews up on my website if you want to know what other people think about getting a consultation with me. Check out my Patreon. I do rising sign horoscopes every single month for each sign. I do a live monthly overview. You get ad-free content. There's a Discord group chat that we're all a part of. Check it out. Like this video if you like it. Please comment. Let me know your ideas. If you want to support me without giving me money, like the video. It literally helps me out so much. So with that being said, I love and appreciate you guys, and I'll be seeing you next week.